Hi. Well, again, about journalism and all of that. There are two things that you said that struck me, and I wanted to know how you find a balance between them. You said two things. You said that there was an incident of supposedly bombing a UN school, and then it turned out it wasn't true, and it's a shame that there weren't journalists there to tell the real story. And also you said that it's not the journalist often that, put the headline up there. It's someone else, and the editor, decides how it's going to be presented and how it's going to be sold. So two things. What came out of it is, at least in my Israeli ears, is that people were completely okay with the idea that a report came out that there was literally carpet bombing in Gaza, and that a school was just bombed for the heck of it. And only 2 days later, when the disclaimer came, nobody wanted to listen. So already from the get-go, people will believe that. And the editor put it out there. And it doesn't matter who reported it. It matters who let it, get out at the end to the open. And nobody was there to stop it. Not the journalist in the beginning, but nobody was there to stop it closer to the end process, saying, well, hey, wait a minute, am I really going to put on a story about carpet bombing without, double or triple checking? That's one. And the second thing you said was, in the beginning it took you 7 minutes to explain Hebron before you even got to the problem. And it took you another 4 minutes to explain a problem that happened with that said school. And you said that there should be maybe a correction of how journalists are treated, or to allow more journalists in Israel more easily or into Gaza more easily. But human nature is that nobody really wants to listen to the really good news. You would rather, read a piece of gossip than a fluff piece about someone. So even if you let 10 more journalists in who are supposedly unbiased, which story will end up in the headline? Is it a change that should happen at the bottom, getting the journalists in, or is it a much deeper problem of what's get published?
Okay. First of all, I think you misunderstood what I said at the beginning about Gaza. What I was saying is, there was an Israeli artillery shell that killed 40 people. It's not that it's not that the story was incorrect. There was an Israeli artillery shell that killed 40 people, most of whom were innocent civilians. So the story was not incorrect. What was missing was the context. And the reason the context was missing is because the journalists weren't there. And, if we don't have access, then we can't give the context. Now, beyond that, I disagree with your second question as well, saying that we don't report good stories. And I think if you do a search on any of these, there are plenty of stories of coexistence and of good news. I've done quite a few stories about Israel's solar energy program, which has nothing to do with the conflict. I think journalists are looking for stories that are actually, pro-human stories on both sides that have nothing to do with the conflict. I recently read a story about nightlife in Ramallah and how, bars are opening and discos are opening. We are looking for all kinds of stories beyond the conflict. Now, when the fighting gets bad, that's going to be our first priority. That's just how it is, and you would say if there was, God forbid, a suicide bombing that killed 10 Israelis, and I didn't do that story, and instead did a story about, a Palestinian opera, you would say, wait a minute, there was a suicide bombing with 10 people killed. Why aren't you covering that? So part of it is, it depends which side you're covering, where you're coming from. There has not been a suicide bombing inside Israel in over 2.5 years now. And I think that, as long as I mentioned this, let me just sort of say briefly why I think that is. And I think it's due to a few things. It's due to Israeli intelligence. It's due to the wall, the security barrier that Israel is building in and around the West Bank. However, the wall still has holes. If you want to drive far enough around, you can get in. And it's due to Hamas making a decision not to carry out suicide bombings because it doesn't want another Israeli invasion into Gaza. So it's due to a bunch of things. But if there's a suicide bombing, I'm going to cover it. If there is an attack that kills 40 civilians in Gaza, whether or not there was rocket fire from that area first, I'm going to cover it. So I think it really is, how do you find the balance? But I personally really look for other stories to cover, and I think most journalists do too. I think we're looking for, and I think that at this point, people's eyes kind of glaze over with the violence. I think about Afghanistan, I think about Pakistan. The stories that I remember in the coverage, we're not talking Israel now, are the ones that tell me something I didn't know. I mean, by the way, I don't know if you guys know, 70 people were killed in a mosque in Pakistan on Friday. But what I want is more than that 70 people is why, what are the underlying causes? I want to read stories about real people and how they're dealing with things. And that's really what I try to do. So the problem is that when there's a lot of violence, you don't have a choice. That's what you have to cover. When there's not violence is when we have the time and the opportunity to do different kinds of coverage. Yeah.
Hi, Linda. Very different topic. Recently, we had a husband and wife, very dear friends, visit us from Israel. And Dan was born in Israel. He's in his 70s, and his mother was a friend of David Ben-Gurion. She was a pioneer. He shocked me when he said, maybe it's time that we give back the lands that we took before the Yom Kippur War, before the 1967 war. And I was really shocked when I heard him say that. He'd never said that before. And he said, I'm very tired. A lot of us are very tired. And this, might solve everything. And I was wondering if you've heard this from other people.
Do you mean the West Bank and Gaza? Or I don't know what lands he's referring to.
Pre-1967.
Pre-1967. Yeah. That's, basically in 1947, there was a UN partition plan that would have given, an Israeli state and a Palestinian state within the area that is this little, in other words, in this area, there would have been two states. I don't see how you do that today. The question of there being, of people being tired, yeah, people are. They're tired of the conflict. They're sick of the conflict on both sides. And that's one of the reasons that I think if a serious peace deal is presented to people, they'll take it, because they are tired. The controlling, the West Bank and Gaza, you've got thousands of young Israeli soldiers stationed at checkpoints. You've got, it takes a toll. There also is, and I heard the end of the Consul General's speech, an increasing campaign to delegitimize Israel. I think that's true. Cultural artists are canceling their tours to Israel. Israeli academics are not being invited to conferences. There's the BDS, the campaign against divestment of anybody that has any connection with Israel. And that's something that Israelis are concerned about. They don't like feeling that everybody's mad at them. And I think that people are tired of the conflict, tired of the violence. There's a group called the Parents Circle, which is made up of hundreds of Israelis and Palestinians who have each lost somebody to the violence, and who say, and who meet regularly, and to say this conflict just has to end. There are two peoples in this very small piece of land, and somehow you have to figure out a way to live together. And that's something that is not easy. But I think, polls show that 2/3 of Israelis and 2/3 of Palestinians are still willing to accept a two-state solution, but each side thinks the other side isn't serious about it.
Actually, I thought there was a two-state solution in 1948, but I guess I digress. My question, as I was listening, I'm coming away with the feeling that it's the Israelis that are not encouraging or wanting to have an integration of the children. And I can only recall having been involved in Neve Shalom, where you have a community of Arab children and Israeli children. But how comfortable is the Israeli child when the pictures of the martyrs are up on the wall? As a mother, I don't think that's really encouraging peace for my children to sit together with a Palestinian child. As far as integrated studies are concerned, those are available, and they are free and open to all Palestinians, and it is free and open to all Bedouins. I myself personally know of a Bedouin student at the Soroka Hospital. He is the 9th child. His father's told the 9th child, you're going to the Jewish school. And the one kid that went to the Jewish school is the one who ended up being a doctor because he was given that opportunity. The pressure, the odious looks that he received from the Bedouin community was so horrific. I asked him if he was going to go back. He didn't think he was going to go back to the tents because he was considered a traitor. You have the Arava Institute. 1/3 of the population of that school is Israeli, the other third is Palestinian, and the other third is Jordanian, all coming together, all studying to find the most medicinally beneficial vegetation that will grow in this arid community, what to help mankind. That's available.
Can I respond? Okay, a few things. First of all, I think you're confusing two things I said. I was talking about Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza. The Arava Institute, which I'm extremely familiar with, and they do wonderful work. Anyone who doesn't know about it, please look them up. My sister-in-law is one of the people who runs the Arava Institute. They have three in Kibbutz Keturah. It's my No, not Elaine Sharon. They have 3 Jordanian students this year. It's not 1/3. And that has to do more with the Jordanian community, with Jordan. There are very small opportunities that are open. And I think that in universities, Arab students of Israel are in the university, Arab Israelis, not Palestinians. Not Palestinians who live in Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. I think that it has to come from both sides. And I really did not mean to say that Israel's at fault. The Palestinians are equally at fault. The two sides demonize the other. And until you have a way, and I think that to say, well, I'm not going to do it until they do it. Are the Palestinian textbooks on Israel good? No. The Jordanian textbooks are worse. I don't know. I've read them. I read them in Arabic. I've read the Jordanian textbooks are far more anti-Israel than the new Palestinian textbooks that have been produced. But I think that to say, well, I'm not going to do anything until the other side does it, is really doing both peoples there a disservice.
Just some fairness,
other people,
just a response. When I was at the Hebrew University, my first boyfriend was Palestinian. So needless to say,
You mean
in
an Arab
Shikun
city?
HaElef,
Okay.
Palestinian.
Okay. Thank you.
You have spent some time critiquing and showing the threats to Israeli democracy. How much time have you spent? How much time has NPR spent? How much time have journalists spent critiquing the lack of democracy, say, in Egypt, in Syria, in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, in the Palestinian Authority? Do you think that great disparity in coverage is fair and balanced? Secondly, you have mentioned that Jewish children don't assimilate with Arab children because they fear what they do not know. Perhaps on the contrary, they fear what they do know. They know every Arab person is a potential bomb thrower. Not every Muslim is a terrorist, but every terrorist is a Muslim.
Okay. All I would say is we do stories about the lack of democracy in all of those countries. We don't always have the same access that we have in Israel. Part of what makes Israel such an interesting place to cover is the the fact that we can do this coverage. And we do stories on these other places. We don't always have the same access. I agree with you, we should do more coverage of the Arab world. I mean, I think that since September 11th, we have to learn about the Arab world as much as we can. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't cover Israel and the threats to Israeli democracy. Thank you.